Today, we're diving into a really deep argument about the very purpose of human relationships. We're going to break down a source that asks a huge question. Is having children just a biological thing, or is it something much bigger, a divine and ethical requirement?
So, let's get right to the heart of it. The whole discussion really boils down to this one question. The source material asks, can a relationship truly be considered divinely ordained if it doesn't have the potential to create new life?
Now, this source doesn't bury the lead. It states its conclusion right up front. From its perspective, relationships that can't lead to children go against what it sees as the essential purpose of human existence. So let's unpack how it actually builds that case.
Okay, so the argument is really built on three big pillars. The first one is theological. It grounds the entire premise in the idea of a direct command from God. And the foundation for this whole case is one of the most well-known lines from the book of Genesis: be fruitful and multiply. According to this source, this isn't just a friendly suggestion. It's interpreted as a direct instruction, a command that establishes the core purpose of humanity right from the start.
The text argues this isn't just about, having more people around. It's much deeper. From this viewpoint, having children is how you fulfill God's will. It's how you strengthen communities and keep traditions alive. The family unit itself is seen as the bedrock of morality, and children are framed as both a divine blessing and a sacred duty across major Abrahamic religions. So, the bottom line from this first pillar is pretty clear. By this logic, any relationship that inherently cannot lead to children is seen as a direct contradiction of this divine purpose for humankind. All right, that was pillar number one. The second pillar shifts gears a bit, moving from a divine command to a much broader ethical and societal obligation.
And this is where the source introduces a really key concept, the ethical imperative. This idea frames procreation not just as a personal choice, but as a kind of collective responsibility. The argument is that we all have a moral duty to keep civilization going by passing our culture, our values, and our traditions on to the next generation.
Now, to build this ethical case, the source does something pretty interesting. It doesn't just stick with religious texts. It actually pulls from secular philosophy, arguing that even frameworks like utilitarianism, which is all about the greatest good, and deontology, with its focus on moral duty, both point to procreation as a core responsibility for humanity's survival. It's a clear attempt to broaden the appeal of the argument beyond a purely faith-based audience.
But you might be thinking, what about personal fulfillment? What about love being the main point of a relationship? Well, the text tackles that head-on. It suggests that while individual happiness is, of course, important, it doesn't get to override what's presented here as a collective moral obligation to keep society itself healthy and moving forward.
And this ethical argument isn't just theoretical. It gets connected to a very real, pressing concern, one that's backed up by a lot of data: declining populations.
To get what's happening here, there's one number you really need to know: 2.1. Demographers call this the replacement level. It's the average number of children per woman a society needs just to keep its population from shrinking generation to generation. And that's not even counting immigration. And as you can see from this data, a lot of developed nations are way, way below that 2.1 line. You've got Japan, Italy, Germany, all with fertility rates that are pointing toward a shrinking population over time. So why does this matter? Well, the source lays out some pretty severe consequences. When a population gets older, it puts a huge strain on healthcare and social security. Fewer workers can lead to a drop in economic productivity. It can also weaken the bonds between generations and, as the argument goes, erode the very cultural and religious traditions that get passed down, posing a risk to civilization itself. And to really underscore the gravity of the situation, the material uses some very powerful language. It warns that this isn't just about a slow, gentle decline. If these trends keep up, it says some parts of the world could face a complete population collapse. Okay, so we've covered the theological angle and the ethical argument. The final pillar presented by the source is rooted in science, specifically evolutionary biology. Looking at this from a purely Darwinian point of view, the logic they present is very straightforward. Evolution is all about survival and passing on genes. Therefore, the argument goes, the primary biological purpose of sexual relationships has to be reproduction, to make sure the species survives. And this is where the source really connects all the dots. The argument is that these two very different worldviews, one religious, one scientific, actually point to the exact same conclusion. Whether you call it fulfilling God's will or ensuring genetic transmission, the essential function from both of these perspectives is procreation.
So this brings us right back to that central conflict. The way this logic is framed, it poses a direct challenge. If the divine and the biological purpose is continuation of the species, can love and emotional fulfillment all by themselves be enough to define the ultimate purpose of a relationship?
So, how does this all come together in the end? Well, the conclusion synthesizes these three very different lines of reasoning into one single overarching argument.
So, just to recap the case we've walked through, first, you have the theological pillar, the divine command to be fruitful. Second, the ethical and societal one, the moral duty to keep civilization going. And third, the biological pillar, the evolutionary drive for species survival.
And the final conclusion drawn from bringing these three pillars together is that any relationship which doesn't contribute to procreation is, by this definition, incompatible with what the source identifies as the fundamental purpose of humanity, across all three of those domains.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about. In a world where ancient religious texts and modern population data are colliding, the challenge remains: how do we, as a society, define the purpose of family for our future?